from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following.
The West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission, working with students and families to improve college access and student success for a better West Virginia. West Virginia University, online at wvu.edu.
Good evening and welcome to the Legislature Today. I'm Andrea Lanham at the Capitol Building in Charleston. Today, the West Virginia Senate unanimously passed its version of the budget bill. The Senate's bill did not include the governor's revised revenue estimate of $58 million in its $4.38 billion budget. Both the House and Senate finance chairs said they hope to have the budget passed as quickly as possible. Before passage, a very enthusiastic Senate Finance Chair, Craig Blair, urged support of the measure.
We've worked together with the House delegates throughout this session on trying to make it so that we ran bills that had fiscal implications and got them finished early so that we could put ourselves in a position to have this budget bill out in an early fashion. There was no tax increases. We had the largest pay increase in what I believe is probably our state's history, and not just for teachers or school employees, service personnel, or state employees is what I meant to say. We did it across the board, together, again with no tax increases. We didn't use the governor's $58 million of revenue estimates that came, or revised revenue estimates is the way I want to put it. And that's to be commended to this body. And they may come to bear fruit into the future, and that's where the surplus revenue section will come in into the future for us to be able to do that. We're likely to complete this bill today. If everything stays on the timeline of where we're at and what we're working on, we're very likely to be back in here tonight, if everything goes right, and complete this bill on day 58. It was my goal to have it done, our goal to have it done by day 60. We're 2 days early. Feels pretty good to provide a little bit of history along with it. That this is a historical event, I believe, and when we don't run into having a budget week, that saves about $35,000 a day. I'm almost certain of that number. That saves the taxpayers that we can put towards another good use in the state of West Virginia. And one last remark. My presentation, again, I told you that the bill ran faster than our ability to get the presentation put together. Anybody that has seen something that they would want up there next year or done a little bit different, I want to hear about that, because I believe that this is a better way of doing this, and getting it, communicating it out to the public as well. And so any thoughts and suggestions on how to improve what we're doing, I want to hear from you. I urge passage, Mr. President.
On this question being 33 yeas, 0 nays, 1 absent and not voting, more than a majority of those elected having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. The senator from Ohio County.
Joining us now to discuss the budget and more is Senate Majority Leader Ryan Ferns. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So as we just saw, the Senate passed its version of the budget bill today unanimously with no remarks and I think maybe one question. It seemed rather anticlimactic, or was everybody just exhausted by this point?
No, I think it's much to the credit of our Senate Finance Chairman, Craig Blair, and his staff, quite frankly. I mean, Chairman Blair has managed this process in a way that I think is unseen before in our legislature. It was his goal. He announced it at the outset of the session to have this done early, to have it ahead of schedule, to not require the additional days after completion of the session in order to finalize the budget, and he's made good on that. Promise, even with the the challenges that we had over the last couple of weeks with our teacher strike. So it's a historic day in the state legislature. I've talked to a lot of folks who've been around a lot longer than I have, and they said this has never happened this early. And for the possibility that this bill is matched up with what the House of Delegates wants to do, we may be able to avoid a conference committee, just have the House take this up, suspend the rules, and pass it right away, and be completely done with it early, very early, even ahead of the end of the regular session. I think it's historic, and it's a great accomplishment for everybody involved.
And we heard from the Senate Finance Chair just now, and I talked to the House Finance Chair as well, and they say they want the budget done tonight. Mm-hmm. Are you rushing us?
No, as I said, the House Finance Committee, Senate Finance Committee worked together on crafting this. Once we determined a resolution for the public employees' pay and pay raises, there's really all new funds that are available in the state budget are all being directed towards public employee pay raises. So there's really nothing else to be considered, for spending. So, when we realized that, I think the House Finance Chairman and Senate Finance Chairman sat down together and said, all right, let's just link everything up, make it consistent. There's no sense in forcing it to a conference committee. And so, like I said, we passed it 33-0 today. We had one person missing. And, as you said, one question, no remarks, unanimous vote. I can't even remember very many unanimous votes in my time here. So I think it's just a good work product. And when you have unanimous support, there's no sense in delaying it. Keep in mind, within this budget, are pay raises for all the other public employees that weren't in the legislation that we passed earlier this week. So, to hold up this budget, for procedural purposes would be delaying the passage of a bill that will guarantee pay raises for all the rest of the public employees who weren't included in 4145.
So let's go into the cuts. Now, the pay raises did necessitate some cuts to programs, or not programs, but some initiatives that were happening. So we know that additional funding to tourism and commerce are cut. Let's go into some of the others.
Well, you had the new tourism, new commerce money. There was money that was being redirected to highways, $12.5 million. We had $13.5 million of lottery money that was planning to be redirected, that was collected within this budget. We had $10 million to Medicaid that was cut. And I think those are primarily all the big areas, unless I'm leaving something out. There were other smaller amounts of money that the Finance Committee was asked to consider with new funding this year. And basically, when we redirected all additional money to public employee raises, the Finance Chairman and Committee basically had to tell all those people whatever was under consideration is no longer possible to consider those things. So there were some smaller areas that were essentially cut as well.
And I think it's important too to mention with Medicaid is that the $10 million, this would be made up in supplementals or filled in later. Is that correct?
It's possible. It's possible. The Senate's position throughout this whole pay raise negotiation was we were concerned about the manner in which the governor arrived at this new revenue estimate that included $58 million. It was obvious to us that that money came about as a result of a strike negotiation. And if you heard the governor earlier this week on talk radio, he was asked directly, do you think the state can afford 5% pay raises across the board for all public employees? And his answer was no, of course we can't. So that to me was an obvious sign that maybe even his office had concerns about the legitimacy of this new $58 million. So what we needed to do from the Senate's perspective to guarantee that we could afford all those pay raises was to make cuts within the budget and not rely on this new revised revenue estimate, which we were able to do. As you mentioned, it did require cuts into areas like Medicaid. Now, if that $58 million does come to fruition, and then that money could be passed along in a supplemental to restore those cuts. But again, that's only if that money comes in.
Now, with those revised revenue estimates, the House was initially more trusting than the Senate on this, but it appears that the House has accepted the Senate's position on the revenue estimates. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I mean our budgets, as far as I understand, are identical in their spending, and so they did agree. That was part of the negotiation. Quite frankly, the governor's office agreed to go along with a budget that didn't rely on those revised revenue estimates, and I think it actually helps the executive branch because, as I mentioned in that conference committee, if you saw earlier in the week, that it was brought to my attention that our bond rating agencies were raising questions to the governor's office about where this new $58 million came from. So I think it helps the governor's office, it helps the whole state of West Virginia to alleviate the concerns of those bond rating agencies by not utilizing this $58 million.
Now, when I talked to the House Finance Chair earlier, he said that he didn't feel the House and the Senate were all that far apart as far as the budget goes. Do you feel the same way?
It's my understanding that the budgets are nearly identical, and it would be the reason why the House would consider just taking up our budget tonight and passing it, suspending the rules. Again, within that budget, you have contained the pay raises for all the other public employees that weren't included in House Bill 4145. So to delay action on this budget bill would be delaying passage and guarantee of pay raises for all other public employees.
Do you see any major differences or any minor differences between those two budgets right now, or you think it'll just go through?
To my knowledge, again, it's my understanding that they are nearly, if not completely identical. And again, that there was coordination between the House and Senate Finance Committees in order to arrive at that point. It's my understanding, the way it was explained to me, is that they are identical.
Now, we are about 48 hours outside that teacher walkout and the agreement that resulted from that. There was a lot of anger, especially towards Senate Republicans. I just wanted to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of folks who were very eager to see the Senate just pass a pay raise bill. And there was a lot of folks, regardless of your beliefs or your position on the debate, that just wanted to see kids back into school. And there was nobody that wanted that debate to end faster than the Senate Republicans. I mean, we were on the hot seat. I chaired the conference committee on the pay raise bill. And, at that point, the attention of everyone in the state shifted to those few individuals who were on the conference committee. But we recognize and stood firm on the fact that we have a constitutional duty to pass a balanced budget based on our best knowledge of revenue and revenue estimates. And again, as I mentioned before, we were not comfortable with the manner in which these revised revenue estimates came out. It was obvious to us that it was done in an emotional setting in an effort to end a teacher strike, and we felt like we were going to be derelict of our duty to the rest of the citizens of West Virginia if we simply just passed that bill out without careful consideration. So while I understand why people wanted to move quickly, as I mentioned, the bond rating agencies earlier, we weren't the only ones who were paying attention to this revised revenue estimates, and we weren't the only ones who had concerns about it. If the bond rating agencies had come out and downgraded our bond rating, that would have cost us, millions and millions of dollars in increased interest rates anytime we borrow money. So I think it was the right thing to do despite all the concern.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us. Again, we have Senate Majority Leader Ryan Ferns.
Thank you.
A House bill that would create 100 single-member legislative districts following the 2020 U.S. Census was reported out of Senate Judiciary today. Supporters argue the bill creates equity and a closer relationship between lawmakers and their constituents. However, opponents have given a variety of reasons to oppose it. Let's listen to a bit of the discussion this morning on the effort to amend the bill to include an independent commission that would select those districts.
Federal level is the most powerful senators, the most powerful delegates dictate what their district will be. And you know what happens to everybody else who's not so powerful, who's not right at the top? They get stuck with the bad districts. This is our chance for the little guy. I mean, for the little guys among us to straighten this thing out, to make it fair, to make it representative of our population. Let's not pass up this opportunity, because believe me, if we pass this, there won't be very far behind the same thing on the Senate, and it should be on the Senate.
The reality is there is no such thing as a nonpartisan anything. We can pretend like it. We can try to put on a show for the public out there and pretend like something is nonpartisan. But the reality is the membership is always going to be appointed in a partisan manner.
What I'm seeing here is an amendment that's basically saying let's go ahead and make sure that the body that's making up the decisions on this is a absolute even body made up of the same amount of Democrats, the same amount of Republicans, which is, I think, is about as good as you're going to be able to get.
It sounds good, but honestly, what it's going to do is open up more corruption, because I can guarantee you both parties is going to have people in their party change their registration from either Republican or Democrat to independent or libertarian or some other party, just so whichever party's in charge to get to appoint these people. Well, guess who's going to? It's going to be an independent, but it's not really going to be an independent. It's going to be politics, and I just don't think there's.
Joining us now is senior reporter Dave Mistich.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's talk about those 100 single-member districts. This has been something that you've been following throughout the session.
Right. This bill sprung up in the House. It's been around all session. There was a lot of discussion over there in the House Judiciary early on about amending the bill, creating this independent district. There was another companion bill that Chairman Schott had talked about. That bill inevitably failed. So, it passed the House, made it over here to the Senate. Obviously, a lot of conversation continued about that independent committee, council, whatever, that would ensure fairness in this process. As we look around the country, we've seen a lot of discussion about gerrymandering and political parties using their majorities to influence redistricting. So I think that played a huge role in the discussion of this. Inevitably, though, that independent commission is not going to be around.
And you've also been covering this bill regarding work requirements for SNAP recipients as well.
Right. That's House Bill 4002, I believe, or 4001.
4001.
Yeah, 4001. And that one was it creates a work requirement for able-bodied adults without dependents. That bill, as of right now, this very moment, is up in the Senate Health Committee. It's expected to pass and then make its way to the floor. Again, it's already passed the House over here in the Senate, so. We'll see what comes of that as well.
And another thing that you've been covering is the medical marijuana bill. Tell me a little bit about that and how it affects the program.
Right. So there was a Senate bill that passed the legislature last session in 2017. It created the Medical Cannabis Act of 2017. As part of that, there's been an advisory board that's been put together to look into this issue and to make recommendations back to the legislature. So they've been meeting pretty often since that bill's passed, and just this about 2 weeks ago or so, reported back some recommendations to the legislature. One of which is that they would include dry leaf or plant form of medical cannabis that would be medically appropriate for administration via vaporization or nebulization. It's not necessarily smoking it as people think of recreationally, but that was one recommendation. Another is to remove limitations on the number of permits for growers, processors, and dispensaries. And then a third recommendation that they had was to vertically integrate growing, processing, and dispensaries so that one person or one company could be involved in all aspects of that. I spoke to Delegate Riley Moore, who's the lead sponsor of a bill that looks to implement some of those recommendations, and here's what he had to say.
It is absolutely imperative. The House has passed this bill. Here we are almost on the last day. It is Thursday. We are out of here on Saturday most likely. It is over on the Senate side. These provisions in this bill that have been recommended to us by the Medical Marijuana Advisory Board must go into law, or this program perhaps is just going to be really a shell program that is something that the people of West Virginia have asked us to execute, and we voted to do so. So without these fixes, this program will likely not get underway.
So definitely some interesting commentary there. And as I understand, you also talked to Dr. Gupta.
Yeah, I did. And like Delegate Moore said, Dr. Gupta sort of reinforced the imperative nature of getting this bill through this session. and also talked about some of the other implications of getting this bill together now rather than trying to wait. I should point out that the program for licensing doesn't go in effect until July 1st, 2019, so there's still more than a year away until that happens. But Dr. Gupta had a lot of things to say about this bill that's over in the Senate Judiciary Committee right now. It's on the agenda for this afternoon. We'll see if they get to it, but I spoke to Dr. Gupta. Here's what he had to say about this issue.
My responsibility is towards all of the citizens and residents of West Virginia. When this bill was passed and signed into law by Governor Justice, one of the things he mentioned to me was that we've got to be able to treat people with passion and compassion. So we've got to be able to treat people with compassion. And I took that to heart, and we started the program. So our really responsibility is to make sure that we're following the mandate that the legislature has provided us and making sure that the program is on track, and we're instilling as much as science is available, because not a lot of science currently is available. In fact, you can say that science is having to catch up to people's needs, and in a state that the opioid and the drug epidemic is center, it's very important for us to be able to offer every option available to people who are suffering with chronic pain.
So what have you heard so far about this bill?
Well, again, there's been a large discussion about, opioids are such a huge problem here in the state of West Virginia. I've just heard from Dr. Gupta on that. There was also some concerns about adding this tri-leaf amendment. That's currently not in the bill right now, as of my understanding. But there was some talks by a few lawmakers around the Capitol here about allowing those who would use medical cannabis to grow their own at home. Some felt that was a little bit too much. Inevitably, we haven't seen that amendment, but I've heard that, from lawmakers around the Capitol here, that they decided to sort of reel that back in without going forward with it because they thought that it would be a little bit too heavy-handed for some people here in the legislature to agree with. So a lot of talks here. We'll see if it makes it out of committee today. If it does, it's still got a chance to pass. But again, both Delegate Moore and Dr. Gupta both explained the imperative nature of getting that done. So
switching gears, you've covered this protesters bill. Talk to me a little bit about what that is.
Right. So there was a bill that came up, coincidentally, it came up right around the same time as the teachers made their way to the Capitol here. So I think a lot of people sort of question the intentions of the legislature in bringing this bill about. What it does is it would allow an unlawful protest that gathers, if someone were to get killed in that unlawful protest, that those who are around at that point in time would be charged with murder of that person. So there were a lot of questions about what the intent of that bill was. I think a lot of lawmakers said that it was mostly just coincidental that all this came up during the midst of the teacher strike and thousands of teachers being here. The senators on the floor today, particularly Senator Corey Palumbo and Senator Trump, the Senate Judiciary Chair Trump, discussed this on the floor, and we have a little clip of that. We'll take a look and listen to that right now.
And it removes antiquated language which makes all persons unlawfully assembled guilty of any deaths or injuries to persons that while the unlawful assembly is taking place or being quelled.
Kind of catches my eye that it says if anyone, as I read this, dies in the course of this, then all persons engaged in such a semblance shall be deemed guilty of such killing or wounding.
That's current law.
I know. So am I reading this right, that if there's a big group of people outside the Capitol
or inside the Capitol,
yeah, right, protesting something, and someone gets killed in the process of that, everyone involved in that protest or activity would be deemed guilty of the killing?
That's the way I read it. I read it the same way my friend from Kanawha does. And if a member of the Department of Public Safety, sheriff or mayor, or any person acting under the order of either of them be killed or wounded in taking such means or by the rioters, all persons engaged in such assembly shall be deemed guilty of such killing or wounding. So the bill removes that language, or would remove that language from the code.
But the bill does not remove that language from the code, does it?
The strike and insert amendment does. I don't know if the original House bill did or not, but the Judiciary Committee strike and insert amendment strikes that language. You're right. Appears the House bill does not, but the Judiciary Committee amendment, strike and insert amendment, adopted yesterday, strikes that language from the code.
Okay, thank you. I compliment you on your good work in the Judiciary Committee.
Well, it seemed a little broad to us as well.
And obviously, all eyes are on the budget tonight, right?
That's right, and we'll see if they get it all the way through, and we'll find out.
Well, thank you so much again, Dave Mistich, senior reporter.
Thanks.
That's it for tonight's broadcast. As we enter the last few days of the session, join us 1 hour early tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. for an extended 1-hour program. And then Saturday, we'll bring you live coverage beginning in the morning on West Virginia Channel. And then at 8 p.m., the Legislature Today brings you the last 4 hours of the 2018 legislative session live from the Capitol building. I'm Andrea Lanham for West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Thanks for joining us and have a great evening.